Welcome to another episode of our podcast, Indiana is Ag+Bio+Science. It's presented by AgriNovus Indiana and Inside Indiana Business. I'm Gerry Dick, the host of Inside Indiana Business, also the host of this weekly podcast where we have in-depth conversations with leaders, innovators, and also entrepreneurs in Indiana's Ag+Bio+Science sector. It's the sector where food, agriculture, science, and technology converge. This week, excited to sit down with Chris Lowery. Chris is Senior Vice President of Workforce Development at Ivy Tech Community College. And Chris, as always, great to see you. Thanks for stopping by.
Gerry, thanks for having me. Always great to see you.
Talk a little bit. We'd like to get some insight into how folks get to where they are. Your path, I know you had substantial background in the private sector and some high-profile positions there, but talk about your path to Ivy Tech Community College.
Well, sure. I think it's probably a rather circuitous route, but, I've been with the college for 5 years. I think originally you and I probably got to know each other when I was at Hillenbrand, was there for 20 years, and as with a lot of advanced manufacturing companies, went through kind of the whole managerial training cycle, everything you would expect from HR to strategy and marketing and so forth. And prior to that was in public policy at both the State House and in Washington. So my blend of background in coming to the college was really the private sector, public policy, but then also education. I spent 12 years on a school board in Batesville, 7 years as the president, and during that time, we declared a truth that we wanted to be one of the best school corporations in the state and set out to do that. And it was during that time that we really created in our community and in our part of the state a really rich relationship with Ivy Tech. And then, lo and behold, I ended up being recruited to the college, and then 3 years ago, Sue Elsperman, who had, been a sort of a public policy and business partner through the years, asked me to take on this senior leadership role, essentially chief workforce officer for the college.
Yeah. We've had Sue on the podcast, Scott Caldwell as well, but remind our listeners about the scope of Ivy Tech Community College, because the system, I think, everyone knows the name Ivy Tech, but I think maybe not a lot of people know how substantial that footprint and that presence is around the state of Indiana.
Yeah, Gerry, and thank you for asking me to do that. Ivy Tech is unique. We are the largest singly accredited community college in the nation. So with that comes scale, and it also comes the ability to take new ideas, new policies, new concepts, and drive those out across the state. We serve about 100,000 students, plus over 60,000 dual credit students in over 400 high schools across the state. We have 18 campuses, 40-some total locations, about 8,000 faculty and staff, so it's a substantially sized organization. And when you really think about what we're trying to do and the mission we're trying to serve, we are really aiming at that Lumina, the Lumina Foundation's 60% post-secondary attainment goal, helping bring Indiana to the point where 60% of our working age adults have a credential beyond high school, because frankly, that's what the economy requires today, and is only going to be the case even more so as we go ahead, and also helping to do our part in preparing at least 50,000 Hoosiers a year to have credentials to meet the needs of the labor market.
That's an ambitious goal, obviously. Are you getting there? I mean, are they on the path? How would you characterize where things stand in that regard?
Yeah, Gerry, we are on the path, and it is going well. 2 years ago, our state Board of Trustees adopted a new strategic plan, and we said to really serve Indiana's economy, there are about 500,000 jobs we're going to have to help fill. Break that down, simple math, about 50,000 a year. When we started this process, Ivy Tech had about 20,000 credentials it was awarding a year. The next year, the number jumped to 25,000 roughly. This year, and we're not done with the count yet, we're around 28,000 credentials. So that's everything from industrial certifications to associate degrees. And we think once we get the industrial certifications counted in there, we'll be well over 30,000 credentials. And as you might tell, I'm kind of reserving a little bit there. I think it's going to be substantially more than that. So the curve and the trajectory is actually ahead of schedule. And I think even more importantly, Gerry, those credentials are now in high demand, high wage fields. I just looked at some numbers yesterday for some analyses and looked at the growth, particularly in areas that relate to all of this, Ag+Bio+Science. And as we look at distinct areas that connect to it, whether it's in IT, whether it's in the Ag+Bio+Science space, advanced manufacturing, and so forth, we're seeing significant growth in those areas, and frankly, a decline in those areas where there is less demand in the marketplace and where there tends to be oversupply, especially from a higher ed kind of standpoint.
Talk about how Ivy Tech really does fit in to the bigger picture. We hear a lot today about technology and innovation converging, and certainly that's the case in the ag biosciences. Sectors full of tech, science, data specialists, even marketers. How does Ivy Tech prepare for these changing workforce opportunities and really create relevant programs? Because that's what it's all about. You know, companies, organizations want to get talent that fits their particular needs.
Yeah, absolutely, Gary. Starting about 3 years ago when we stood up this part of the college, we really reorganized and said, look, we have got to focus on essentially three things: aligning, engaging, and advancing. So aligning with our partners, first starting with employers. So what are employers needing today? What do they see that they're needing tomorrow? Engaging in a really employer-centric and student-centric manner, and then advancing along a demand-driven curve. We instituted, starting now about 2.5 years ago, supply and demand analyses for every one of our programs at every one of our campuses across the entire state. And we began classifying them in the simplest of terms from a supply and demand standpoint. So was supply vastly exceeding demand? And if so, you know what that means. That means shrinking programs or perhaps even eliminating some where market demand just isn't there. And on the other side of that, looking at where there's just this vast demand in all those areas you mentioned, the demand is just far exceeding what the supply is. So we began to adjust our programs accordingly and right-size them to meet the needs of the marketplace. So we utilize data, principally from EMSI or IMSI, which happens to be owned by Strata Education here in Indianapolis, great company who supplies most of our demand data. And then we triangulate that out with individual employers at the community level, and then what I would say are thought leaders and aggregators across the state. We meet quarterly with a group we call the thought leaders. Not very original, but it really indicates who they are from each one of the key sectors. And then we have a leadership team, report to me, vice presidents, who own, if you will, those distinct marketplaces, but then they work together because we understand all of that's blurring.
As you look at talent gaps that exist around the state of Indiana, what needs to be filled? What potential do you see for the Ag+Bio+Science talent pipeline in the state? Because every sector has a need for talent. As you look at the Ag+Bio+Science pipeline, where do you see opportunities?
Yeah, I think the opportunities are vast. Again, recency effect is with me today. I had a great conversation yesterday. I can't say with whom right now, but an innovator here in Indiana, and the entire conversation was about autonomous vehicles. And he knows our team fairly well, and we were talking about the next session we need to have and bringing in more of his folks, more of the team that I work with. And he started mentioning individuals on my team, and what we concluded was, we need our vice president from the IT sector at the table. We need our vice president from the advanced manufacturing sector. We need our vice president, right, you get the point, from the logistics sector, all of these different folks at the table, because this is really blurry. When you think about autonomous vehicles, and our friends at AgriNovus or at the FFA and others remind us, look, the first folks that were using autonomous vehicles were out in the field. It's kind of a cool thing to think about automobiles and so forth, and we're all just getting to touch that a little bit ourselves as consumers. Well, that's been happening out in the field for a long time. So the Ag+Bio+Science world really blur these. And then when you think about the whole list of the alphabet soup, if you will, AI, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual reality, Internet of Things, they are all tied in what Ag+Bio+Science is doing. I think that's going to be lifted up next week at the Forbes conference. But all of those capabilities are squarely centered. And then when you think about just the business aspect of it. I know we had one of our colleagues from Purdue with you earlier. Well, the Ag+Bio+Science world has to also be looking at the informatics school, and informatics school students at Indiana University need to be thinking about Ag+Bio+Science because they're just incredible potentials, or, those bright students at the Kelly School, or, just thinking of IU, or the folks at the Miller School at Ball State, these just super business students who are going to find all kinds of interesting opportunities in Ag+Bio+Science that they never would have thought of probably previously.
Based on what you're saying, based on your personal background too, would it be accurate to say, in your opinion, that the ability to be successful in this endeavor is dependent upon a cooperation of the so-called three-legged stool: public sector, private sector, academic institutions all coming together? Yeah,
it really is. And, Gary, I saw that firsthand at Hillenbrand. And again, what an interesting company. I think a lot of Hoosiers might think, oh, the Hillenbrand, they're the ones that own the casket company. Well, and as you know today, that's a small portion of what they do. They are a global industrial company, 40 countries, just a large institution, which actually happens to reach into the Ag+Bio+Science area. I recall working on a project with them when I was still there in Kansas City, in the state of Kansas, where the blurring of what you just described resulted from a partnership between Kansas State University, the state of Kansas, the U.S. Department of Commerce, and the subsidiary owned by Hillenbrand. Well, we're seeing that all over the state of Indiana today, too. We see it at our campuses. We see it, the blurring not only of the public education and the private sector, but also philanthropy. Just before coming in here to talk with you, I hopped off of a call with some fellow board members with Gleaners. I'm on the Gleaners Food Bank. And one of the specific things about which we talked for almost 20 minutes were collaborative partnerships. And, as an example, at our Noblesville location, just up the road, we have in a facility, higher ed, reaching into K-12, private businesses partnering with us like crazy, a Gleaners Food Bank location, and the Indiana Department of Workforce Development. It's alive, and it's alive all over the state, and that's what it's going to take to really make sure our economy is thriving as we go forward.
Final question for you, Chris, and that's just giving back. Why you feel it is important for you personally, but also Ivy Tech, to really connect with organizations. Ivy Tech is an investor, importantly for this conversation, in AgriNovus. You chair the Career Coaching and Navigation Action Team for Governor Holcomb's Workforce Cabinet, chair of the Board of Trustees of the Sagamore Institute, the think tank. Why is that important?
Yeah, I guess I subscribe to a philosophy that, and it's certainly articulated by others well before me, that there is this blend when we think about the human condition, the ability to thrive, economic vitality that sometimes involves relief. It often does involve opportunity, and ultimately there's some kind of transformation that takes place. And by the way, I'm kind of stealing from Arthur Brooks there, and with tip of the hat to him. But if you think about the different organizations we've discussed today, sometimes folks need relief, but at the same time are seeking opportunity. So we might have, for example, a student who is trying to do the next thing, get that credential, a better job, a career, but they also happen to be in a place where they are experiencing food insecurity or in their family. So blending those things together, we have to think about recognizing that others have their expertise. AgriNovus, oh my goodness, they are the Ag+Bio+Science experts in the nation. And the ability to blend that work with the work of Ivy Tech, with the work of what government is doing and often not-for-profits, just to me sends a signal and a recognition that we can't do these things alone. And that's not to be tried and kind of pull on an old phrase, but that is the reality that to really think about this, if I think about your earlier construct of the public sector, the private sector, and education, to me that's sort of like 1 + 1 = 3 3/4 or 4 or 5, right, when we do this right.
Chris Lowery is Senior Vice President of Workforce Development at Ivy Tech Community College. Chris, thank you very much for taking the time to be on our podcast this week, for your insights into the Ag+Biosciences and all that you're doing for Indiana as well. Well, the Ag+Bio+Science podcast is a weekly production partnership between AgriNovus Indiana and Inside Indiana Business. Before we sign off this week, I do want to mention AgriNovus has opened registration for its 2019 Ag+Bio+Science Innovation Summit. It will be November 20th, and this year I'll be joining as a featured speaker. I'm looking forward to that. And to learn more and to register for this really important event, it's November 20th, the Ag+Bio+Science Innovation Summit. Just visit visit agrinovusindiana.com/summit. I'm Gerry Dick. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
This podcast is a product of Inside Indiana Business, hosted by Gerry Dick, produced by Libby Fritz and Joe Ullery, and was recorded on location at Launch Fishers. More people get Indiana business news from Inside Indiana Business than any other source.